let's get right into a quick intro. An ancient, powerful witch is hell-bent on destroying humanity, and the world's only hope is demonic protector, Hellboy. Okay, enough of that, let's get right into the good.
The good.
First and foremost, I think it's very safe to say that David Arbor delivered a very solid performance as Hellboy. If there was any concern about whether he could fill in the shoes of former Hellboy Ron Perlman, then I think many of those concerns can be put to rest. In my opinion, it's a very similar trade-off to the likes of Michael Keaton as Batman and then going to Val Kilmer's Batman. While Kilmer wasn't exactly as good as Keaton, Kilmer was good enough within the role. Arbor captures the gritty and edgy nature of the character while also bringing a bit of balance when faced with emotional situations. He probably shined the best whenever he would engage in random banter with other characters. Thankfully, Arbor's Hellboy was easily the most intriguing character and certainly holds your attention whenever he's on screen. Moving on, I do think that the general setting for Hellboy was done pretty well. One element that worked well for this film was the additional mythos that was introduced. By having that added exposition in the beginning of the film, we get a bit more backstory and context for Hellboy's character. As a result, this helped to redefine this remake to have its own look and feel. Another positive factor within the effective setting came from the special effects used to illustrate the hellish atmosphere. A lot of the imagery used throughout the movie echoed the literal look and feel of hell. That was definitely a plus because that's exactly what we would expect from a Hellboy movie. Lastly, one thing that was very surprising was just how gory and bloody and violent this movie really was. Hellboy did not shy away at all when it came to depicting extreme graphic violence and horrific carnage. The monsters and ghouls in this film were so terrifying that this movie could easily make people who were squeamish reach for a barf bag. If you need a point of reference, just kind of imagine like any Hellraiser type of movie, or for you anime fans, think of Attack on Titan. Okay, that's it for the good. Let's get to the bad.
The bad.
Well, let's start with the most obvious problem with this movie, and that's the entire script itself. There was an avalanche effect with the script that affected so many different areas of this film. The first victim was the acting, especially with Milla Jovovich's character. The writing did her character absolutely no favors whatsoever. Jovovich is a fine actress. She's been in bad movies before, but she still shined very bright despite it all. However, this was one of the few times where the writing severely handicapped her performance. It's almost like you could tell that she came in, she did her lines, and she gave it her best effort. Unfortunately, the lines that she was given were just too bad and limiting at the same time. The next victim for this script was really the plot itself. The story was just all over the place. We were introduced to characters in a very poor fashion that sometimes felt very strange. It was almost like if a friend brought you to a party and started fraternizing with someone else there, while you stood and watched, and only introduced you to that other person half an hour later into the conversation. That awkward situation without some sort of casual introduction was similar to how we were introduced to characters in this film. Rather than giving us a coherent narrative, we get a bunch of scenes that get followed up by flashbacks, and then we're thrown right back to the present. While this by itself is not a bad writing tactic, it was compounded with unnecessary scenes in the film, and that all made it bad. Speaking of which, this movie was like 30 minutes way too long. The story was rather predictable, and there aren't any real points in the movie where you truly feel concern or worry for the main characters. So naturally, by the time the film is ending, it's really hard to even care about the general situation at hand. There were so many other opportunities that this movie could have taken to explore further and dig a little deeper with, but they neglected all that for unnecessary scenes just for the sake of action. And if you guys know me by now, I'm an action junkie, so I'm all for action. But when it doesn't help the movie, it's kind of like, what is the point? Which brings me to my next point, which is that there were a bunch of scenes that could have been cut out of the movie to kind of help make the story a little bit more succinct and coherent. The giant scene, for example, could have been left completely out of the movie. Never mind the fact that the scene I'm referring to made very little difference to the story, it was shot incredibly poorly. And that's because the cinematography and the editing of this film contributed to a number of other issues. While some of the action scenes were shot in a decent manner, the editing in other scenes started to disrupt the overall tone of the movie. One moment we're in a hellish horror type of film, and the next moment we're in some corny Ghostbusters wannabe type of movie. I mean, there were moments where I was really sitting here thinking like, am I watching a CW TV show from the early 2000s? Like, what is happening here? Which leads me to my very last point, and that's just the fact that the CGI in this movie was really, really bad. It was so bad that one of the main evil creatures looked like Bebop taken directly from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. The crazy thing about this film is that there are actually some pretty good visual effects. However, for as many good visual effects that were in this movie, there are also that many bad ones. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to the reason.
The reason.
Hellboy is a mixed bag of blood, guts, corny jokes, and a discombobulated plot that just begs for Guillermo del Toro to come back. The sad thing about this film is that it has two things working against it. The first obstacle is the high expectation of being equal or greater than the previous Hellboy movies. The second challenge is just the basic production quality. It essentially stumbles and falls over both of these hurdles. I don't know what was going on with this movie, but it felt like the creatives involved just weren't on the same page. The film showed some real glimpses of good potential, but then it would take a sharp turn in another direction. So when it comes to the rating for Hellboy, I've got to give it a 5 out of 10. Now, as a fan of the previous Hellboy movies, I came into this film with like some high expectations and really just hoping that it would be equal or at least better than the previous film. Unfortunately, this doesn't even compare to the previous Hellboy movies. I wanted so badly to believe that the graphic horror and violence, which I really appreciated, would be enough to keep me engaged in this film. However, after reflecting upon what happened in this movie, it's just not. As a matter of fact, I really do think that this movie would have done a lot better if it was just a Netflix series instead. Now, my suspicion is that if you were interested in seeing Hellboy as much as I was, at this point you may just be interested in seeing just how bad this movie can be. And that's totally understandable. Everyone slows down to see a car wreck just out of curiosity. So feel free to go see Hellboy, but at your own risk. Hopefully with much lower expectations, you might actually enjoy the movie a little bit more compared to somebody that just went in blind. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have seen Hellboy, what did you think about it? Was it better or worse than the previous movies? Was there anything in there that you really liked or that you really hated? Let me know in the comments down below so we can talk about it. As always, I truly appreciate you guys taking the time to watch my videos. If you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I've got more videos and reviews to do for you all, and until next time, I'll see you all later.